I el Tristan Perich, un robot que ha sigut una experiència realment molt interessant per nosaltres, i la idea sorgia del nostre interès per donar sortida o visibilitat al treball que s'està fent dintre de l'art sonor. Llavors, que millor que és un centre, que és un comitè que està treballant molt de temps en aquest tema, i el Tristan Perich, que és un dels artistes a tenir en compte en aquest món. Pere Ravallós, que ha vingut per justament presentar aquesta exposició, i llavors us deixo més, que són els que més tenen que explicar sobre el projecte que hem presentat aquí. Moltes gràcies.
Molt bé, gràcies Gabriela, i gràcies a l'Emilio, al Quico, a tota la gent de Barcelona, que ens han acollit molt bé. Res, pensàvem que valia la pena, ja que avui tenim aquí l'artista, el Tristan Perich, fer una breu explicació, una mena de visita comentada una mica informal de l'exposició, la gent que esteu avui aquí. Aleshores, com a introducció del Tristan Perich, en lloc de fer com una mena de resum de la seva biografia, pensava que us proposaria una sola idea i després li passaré el micròfon amb ell perquè evidentment és la persona més adequada per comentar-nos la seva obra. La idea és la següent. Potser les obres que veieu poden tenir un aspecte com molt formal, una mica com que et deixen una mica fora. I m'agradaria que penséssiu el següent. Aquesta idea que deia Glenn Gould d'una fuga és un procés que versa sobre el propi procés. Aquesta és una idea musical. Tristan Perich, a més d'artista visual i matemàtic, és compositor, i això és molt visible en la seva obra. Tot el que veieu aquí són peces en les que el contingut i la forma no se separen perquè són processos que versen sobre el propi procés. És a dir, no hi ha cap representació en aquest dibuix més que la visibilització del propi procés de fer-se, i per això té sentit que el que esteu veient és el procés del dibuix, i només si torneu d'aquí 2 mesos veureu pròpiament el dibuix, tot i que el moment en el que el dibuix està acabat té molt poca importància. I això mateix passa amb els treballs en diferents mitjans que Tristan Perich ha anat fent al llarg dels anys. És un artista transmídia en el sentit radical, no en el sentit que tradueix imatge en so, o tradueix so en text, sinó en el sentit que agafa un mateix procediment i l'aplica a través de diferents mitjans. Crec que aquesta idea és un bon fil conductor per ajudar-vos a relacionar-vos amb aquesta exposició. Aleshores, el Tristan estava avisat del que diria, per tant, ara no m'estan entenent, però sap el que estic dient, però evidentment ara em passo l'anglès i li donaré la paraula a Tristan. Si hi ha alguna cosa que no enteneu, estaré content de traduir que faci falta, però crec que és una mica cansat estar fent el doble idioma tota l'estona, per tant, en principi ens passem a l'anglès si no direu el contrari. So Tristan, thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting our invitation to show your work. And well, as we planned, the idea would be if you could please do a short explanation of the idea behind your work in general. Then we have like a small presentation of this beautiful thing that is already going on. And then we move to the other space. We discuss a bit Octave, and then we plugged it again, so we can listen to it and we have the opening. So,
okay, great. So thank you, Luis, and thank you very much to everybody here at Àngels Barcelona for organizing this exhibition, inviting me, and doing a really fantastic job installing everything. So, in general, I'm interested in this question of the intersection between the abstract world of computation, of electronics, of computers, of technology, the intersection between that abstract world and the physical world around us, you know, like the material world that we interact with, that we understand, that we hear, that we see, and everything. Because they, sorry, not off. Because the abstract world of computation takes place in the physical world around us. Computers are material things and computation is a material process. It's one that we don't interact with directly very much. We do so through our computers, through the screen, displaying text and images and typing on our keyboard or moving our finger across the screen. But very rarely do we actually interact with computation directly. And this is something that really drives all of my work, thinking about this threshold between this abstract world of computation and how it talks to the world, how it kind of outputs to our world, and how those two worlds interact. I'm trying to speak a little bit slower than normal, so it's a little bit weird of a thought process. I'm sorry, I speak only English. So I hope it all makes sense. So yeah, some of the background is that I'm a composer. I studied math and music, but I grew up writing acoustic contemporary classical music, scoring music for acoustic instruments. And actually, even though I did computer programming as a hobby, I stayed away from electronic sound, electronics, computers in my music. Specifically because they lacked the tangibility, the material that classical instruments have. I grew up playing the piano, which is this beautiful, heavy instrument with at least one string for every pitch, and this mechanism where you press a key down and it hits the string and you hear that sound, and the body of the piano is this very, very heavy, overbuilt thing that specifically is built to amplify the sounds of these strings. And so the piano is this I think it's this beautiful meeting of the sort of function of creating sound through pressing a key. It's like this realization of this interaction with sound, and it's so piano. It's like this mirror of itself in a way, of that form. But electronic music lacks that, right? Because there's no original source to the sound, or at least not one that's part of the typical laws of physics, like vibration and stuff like that. And so there's this idea that with electronic music you can create any sound possible, that it's entirely open-ended because it's not bound by the laws of physics. But to me that meant it was too vague, too kind of abstract. It didn't speak to me in a meaningful way. But all of that changed when I started working with these microcontrollers, these very, very simple microchips that are at the heart of each of these pieces. Because they are like a computer, but it's much, much simpler, much more bare bones. There's no screen, there's no input, there's no keyboard, there's no sound card. It's just a chip that runs code, and it has these input and output pins, and you define what you want those pins to do. So if you want the chip to create sound, you connect the chip to a speaker. If you want it to control a motor, you connect it to a motor. It's just this raw computation that you can harness and you can plug into something, but you have to actually plug it in. You have to physically make this connection to allow electricity to move from the chip to something else. And that really was extremely important for me because it made me realize that computation is this physical process, that it's not purely abstract, that it is, computation is basically just using the laws of physics to move electricity around and process information. But computers, they don't even know they're processing information. It's just moving electricity around, really. And to me, that kind of mechanism, that mechanical way of thinking about computation reminded me of this classical instrumentation, basically. Is this making sort of sense, I hope? Okay. So really it all started with not exactly this piece, but the piece that I made before this called One-Bit Music, where I started exploring sound at this 1-bit level. And 1 bit in 1-bit music means that the sound wave is all ones and zeros, this 1-bit binary information, 1, 0, true, false, on, off. It's the language of digital computers. And we already know that on our computer, information is stored as ones and zeros, but it's, you know, we don't actually interact with it that way. It's always translated into some other medium. So when an image is displayed on your computer screen, those ones and zeros are interpreted by the screen and they turn into color and pixels, you know, this image. But in 1-bit music, in these pieces, I use those ones and zeros directly. And I connect the chip directly to a speaker. And so ones and zeros are actually on and off pulses of electricity. They're, you know, the 0 is a lack of any voltage, and a 1 is the presence of voltage. And this is just a little bit conceptual, but hold on, bear with me for 1 second. So the information that these chips are outputting, these ones and zeros, they're actually voltage levels. And those voltage levels, when you connect them to something like a light, it powers the light. So information is actually like power. It has the ability to do work. Information is voltage potential, it's called in physics. And that's actually how computation works, is that like the information is power, is energy that you know, makes the computer work. And so that same information, those ones and zeros, that voltage, if you connect it to a speaker, and you set it to a 1, it powers the electromagnet in the speaker, it pulls it back, and then you set it to a 0 and it goes back, and then 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. And if you do that at an audible frequency, it turns into a pitch. And that's how, you know, that's how speakers work. A speaker is this object that translates electricity into motion. And so basically this 1-bit music is just using a speaker and turning it on and off really fast and creating sound, creating music with that. So it's the most basic digital representation of sound you can have. When we think about 16-bit sound, like on a CD, well, none of us use CDs anymore, but I have one over there, or like an MP3 player or something, it means the 16 bits of information, 16 ones and zeros, are output from memory, from the chip, and they go to something that converts that 16-bit number into an analog waveform. And so there's this translation that happens, again, between 16 ones and zeros, which is meaningless on its own, and this analog waveform. And I'm trying to basically remove all of these translations, just put us closer to the data, and get rid of all of the layers that separate us from the information itself. And the consequence of that is that 16-bit sound is very high quality. CDs sound like they're high fidelity, they're accurate recordings. And 8-bit sound, like early Game Boy and early video game music, is only 8 ones and zeros, 8 bits. So you only have 256 possible values instead of 63,000 or so values. And so the waveform starts to get a little stair-steppy, and it sounds different, it sounds more electronic. And when you step all the way down to 1 bit, the amount of information that I'm using, it's just on or off. There's no curve at all. It's just these instantaneous transitions. And it sounds very, very primitive, very raw, very electronic. And that's a sound that as a composer I really fell in love with and I started working a lot with. I started working with electronic music, 1-bit sound, like music, and then I brought it back onto the stage, actually, with the musicians and started writing pieces of music for classical instruments, but with speakers on stage that are all playing these very primitive electronic parts to create these duets, basically. And the most recent big piece of that is a piece for solo piano with 40 speakers, and they're all like this size speakers. So it's this exploration of these different ways of making sound in space. Anyway, I feel like I was talking too much about that stuff, but are you kind of with me still? So working with code, programming 1-bit sound, and representing music in code, because this piece, 1-bit Symphony, the software and the music and everything are stored on this chip. And it only has 8K of data, which is very, very little. A CD stores 800 megabytes. So what is that, like? That's 100,000 times more information, I think. Is that right? Than this chip. So it's very, very little information. And what that means is that the music, it can't be stored as a recording. Instead, it's stored as sort of like a score, a digital score, a sequence of numbers that represent pitches that the chip performs. It reads the score and it essentially synthesizes the electronic sound from that. And that's a way that you can go from very little information to essentially audio, which is very, very rich in information. When you think about any musical score, like the score itself is very short, a couple pages, and even that information can be stored even more, even smaller. But the performance of a score, like the way a musician, like a violinist, will turn a violin solo into a performance, they're like adding all of this information, and their violin is adding information, and the room is adding information, and air is adding information. So performance is this like very rich, information-heavy thing. But anyway, so working with these processes in code made me think a lot about process in general. And already my music was very process-heavy. I grew up listening to minimalism and looking at minimalist art, and I was thinking about process a lot. And I realized that the processes in my code were maybe more general than just music, that I could work with other media and sort of map some of these processes or these ideas, these ways of thinking about music onto, for instance, visual art or drawing. And so this drawing machine, which is a project that I've been working on now for 10 years, it's essentially an extension of these thoughts from music, but into two-dimensional space and into this medium called drawing. And for me, the definition of drawing for me, which is very, very rigid, is the exploration of two-dimensional space with a one-dimensional line. And so the question was how to fill space with line. And the process that I defined or programmed to execute this is basically an exploration of randomness and order and populating a two-dimensional space with randomness and order. And so like in this drawing right here, we're kind of seeing a little bit of the order side of things and a little bit of the random side of things. And essentially the machine is extremely simple. It's just these two motors connecting to a pen and this one algorithm that is just this infinite process of moving a little bit and then maybe changing direction. So it's this very, very basic set of instructions that are based on this like move, turn direction step. And the machine, when I program it, I define a certain area for the drawing and I tell it which part is random and which part is straight lines. and then I let go. I start the drawing, and then this is a closed system, and it's just drawing, and it's actually drawing forever until we turn it off. So it's, for me, this process is this like very open-ended, infinite process, and it just basically is a slow build-up of an image through this sort of repeated gesture. So this drawing is going to run for about 7 weeks. The final week of the exhibition will be just the finished drawing, and it moves very slowly and it builds up very slowly. So I hope you get to kind of come back and see it in a later form, because right now there's not much to look at, but it will be a much bigger drawing. So, do you have any questions about like this stuff? I have some smaller drawings that are on paper that are, they were actually made here with this machine. And the paper drawings are very different than the wall drawings because paper is much smoother, and I use a different pen because I don't have to interact with grain as much. And so there's a much different quality to the paper drawings than the wall drawing. And, oh yeah, and so as far as that question about the interaction between the digital world, right, the computation and the real world, these drawings are really about that. It's like the code is running, and the code is this sort of pure abstract thing, and it's outputting to the motors, and it's telling them to move the pen in a certain way. But the real world is actually very messy. Like the wall has texture, the line jitters a little bit every time it moves, the pen runs out of ink every day, so the line gets lighter. And with the wall drawings, actually, the surface is so rough that 24 hours later, the pen is like chiseled down to a point, and the line quality changes because of that. It interacts with the grain differently. So there are all these things that like fight the purity and the beauty of the mathematical side of it and get it everything's really messy. But that's really what I love about this whole process is that, you know, technology, at the end of the day, it has to interact with us through physical space. And I want to acknowledge that and kind of like include that as part of the system. Because also technology doesn't exist unless it speaks in some way to the world. And so I'm trying to, I guess, just create as direct a connection between these two things as possible. I feel like there's more to say, but I'm forgetting. Do you have any questions? And then maybe we can go in the other room.
Yeah, perhaps we could move to...
Sure, I'm talking too long.
Or you want to talk perhaps about 001S or
oh, sure.
Perhaps we could bring a copy in, so what do you think?
Sure, I'll mention it now. Could you grab a copy?
Yeah.
So there's an area to listen to one-bit symphony over there, and next to it is a book that I published called 0.01 Seconds. And thank you. This is the book, and it's called 0.01 seconds because this is a simulation of the code in one-bit symphony over 1/100th of a second. And it's about 700 pages long, and it's all just grids of source code and exactly what the processor is doing over this 0.01 second amount of time. And I made it because I really wanted to show just how much is happening in the technology around us. And the chip in one-bit symphony, it only runs at 8 megahertz. And computers these days are like 1,000 times faster than that. So this is like 1990 era computer speeds in book form. And the beginning of the book, it shows you the source code and the instruction set for the processor, which is the actual definition of the instructions that you can use. Because this is all programmed in assembly language, which is the lowest language, computer language. It's the actual instructions that the processor executes. And so I like to program in assembly language because it's another way of getting close to the processor, using it like a machine, and having a complete control over every single step of the computational process. Yeah, so that's this book, and I think just in general, like this is just another way that we're very disconnected from the technology around us. That so much information is being processed that we cannot possibly comprehend it. It is impossible to comprehend even it takes you it would take like at least a minute to read every line of this book. So it would take like a lifetime to go through this. And so I don't know. I think it's important for us to understand just how extreme all of this technology around us is. How extreme, like even our phones are these days. That we're so kind of like powerless compared to what's happening on them, and we just have to basically trust the people who've written the software and designed the hardware that we use. And so the more we understand that I think the more agency we have in the world. The idea behind this piece and a few other pieces in a series that I'm working on that this is part of is to explore the frequencies of spectrum of sound, but in space. And so the frequency spectrum of sound is, it's a set of all frequencies from 0 hertz to infinite hertz, right? And we can hear a certain subset of that. And there's this fundamental property of sound, which is that when white noise, sorry, I'm collecting my thoughts. So there's white noise. We all know about white noise. It's the sound that a radio makes. Not that we have radios anymore, or a television makes. Not that we have old TVs anymore either. But it's this static sound. And white noise is actually the sum of all frequencies of sound. It's the presence of, it's noise. It's all these frequencies at the same time. Exactly the same as white light is the sum of all colors. It's all frequencies of light together creates white. And same with sound, creates white noise. And so with this piece, when I turn it on, it sounds from a distance like white noise. You're hearing all 300 pitches. 300 is a big number, but it's a very small number compared to infinity. So you hear 300 pitches at least. And if you come closer to the piece, you sort of zoom in on the frequency spectrum. So you hear white noise, and then as you get closer, you hear a smaller window of that until you get right up to the piece and you put your ear to one speaker and you hear just that one pitch. And then you realize that individual pitches together create white noise. And so it's this relationship between white noise and pitch, which are kind of these opposite ideas. But by breaking them up in space, I can explore that as the material for this work. There's a much bigger version of this piece called Microtonal Wall that has 1,500 speakers, over 25 feet. And so it's this idea that I've been exploring for a while. This particular piece is important for me because it connects this sort of scientific approach to sound, this, frequency spectrum analysis, basically, back to music, because this octave is sort of like the, primary interval in music. It's the one that's the, it's I don't know what to say about it. It's everywhere. It's like it's so fundamental, the octave, to music. And so it's an important interval, and it's in an octave, the frequencies double. So if C here and C an octave up will be double the frequency of the bottom C. So the octave is this very basic ratio also of 2 to 1 in frequencies. And so it's the simplest whole number ratio you can have, 2 to 1. And anything other than that, like 3 to 2 or 5 to 3 or whatever, is going to be more complex and less fundamental, we could say. So this kind of captures that fundamental one. And actually, it's not exactly 1 octave. It's almost 1 octave. If there was this panel at that end, but 1 octave up, then that would reach the octave. So this is kind of going up, but never quite hitting the top pitch. That idea, actually, this sort of implied next step, is something that's really important for me in my work too. It's this idea of like an infinite process, a process that can continue, that's bigger than the piece. Because you can imagine this with more speakers, you can imagine that next step and the steps beyond it. Similar like with the drawing machine, which runs, theoretically forever. And even 1-bit symphony, the last part of the piece, it's this piece of music that I wrote, but at the end of the music, the music settles into a chord, like a set of pitches. And at that point, they just stay. It sort of stays in that chord forever, or at least until the battery dies, or you turn it off, or the universe ends or something. But this idea, I think, is this computational idea of the infinite loop, the infinite process, is something that I think we can all understand, even though we can never realize it, right? Because it's always bigger than time, it's bigger than us. But I think that if we think about a process, like just saying add 1, like you start with 1 and you do 1 plus 1, and then you repeat that forever, then you can kind of imagine all of the numbers, and you can imagine that it's infinite. And I think that that's this really profound, beautiful idea, and it's one of the fundamental ideas of mathematical proof, too. It's called the inductive step. It's the idea of assuming something and then setting up a process, and then you can kind of repeat that process forever.
Could you please explain how the progression increases? I think this is important to know.
Yeah, sure. So it's 2-dimensional. So this is the lowest pitch, and then this is higher, 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 and then it continues here. So if you listen this way, it's more obvious. And if you can hear the difference this way, then you're a really professional listener. Yeah, sort of the problem with 2 dimensions is that it's not linear. That's the whole idea of the drawings too, is that like 2 dimensions are different than 1 dimension. You can't just sort of like fit it, and it doesn't really work that way. But there's this beautiful idea in mathematics called space-filling curves, which are, it's a kind of fractal basically, but it's this mathematical function which is, so a function is like a 1-dimensional thing. You give it a value, it gives you another value. But it fills space. And so it's this infinite function that actually hits every single real number, like irrational or real number, within a certain area. Like all of it, all of those 2 dimensions, filling it out to as small as you go. And that was actually one of the basic inspirations for the drawing machine, was filling space that way. Of course, it's impossible in a finite amount of time, again, so I'll keep coming back to this. But one last thing maybe to say is that these, the idea of white noise, again, it's this very analog idea. Anything that's infinite is kind of an analog thing. Like a circle is like, it needs, how would I say this? It like needs an infinite amount of information to properly represent it, because if you're going to stair step it with like a finite amount of information, then it's not going to be a perfect circle. So a perfect circle is this like infinite thing. And white noise is this infinite thing. And sine waves are infinite things. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, things like square waves, like 1-bit waveforms, are very digital. Digital is about the discrete, the individual. And so white noise is this infinite thing that the digital can only approximate, but we can kind of gesture towards that. And I guess that just in general, I really like thinking about these worlds that are very, very far apart. Like, it's very hard for something digital to approximate something random. And vice versa, it's actually very hard for the real world to do anything that's purely digital, because in the real world, we don't have any instantaneous transition from 0 to 1. There's always momentum. It's always a little bit of a slant. Because there's no such thing as like these instantaneous switches in the physical world. And so even though I work with all this information, it's only 1-bit information, it's only 1-bit theoretically. In the real world, it's messy, it's this like imperfect thing that we have to live with. Yeah, do you guys have any questions? That was a good moment. And then I'll plug in the piece. And there's this special moment at the beginning which you all are going to hear. But only if you don't have any questions.
So this, every speaker basically produces a square waveform.
Yes.
And so that also means every speaker already produces a rich spectrum.
Yeah,
because by producing square wave, you're going to have a multitude of harmonic and harmonic partials inside every piece.
Yeah.
So it's something that falls down on the compromise of reality, or is that somehow, because you see a very conceptual artist, is it somehow conceptually included?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's like the next part of the conversation. So square waves actually have infinite overtone series. Like, that's this whole idea, is that you can never, with sine waves, with analog information, you can never even approximate a square wave perfectly. So it goes both directions. And I don't know, for me, that's just, I kind of don't get involved with that part of the question. I think I think you could probably also say, though, that each of those series, those overtone series, approximating a square wave, will be fundamentally like separated, because the spectrum for this speaker won't overlap at all with this spectrum. In fact, it's a logarithmic scale, so there's no whole number ratio at all between them, except it's digital, so there is, because it's approximated. But so in that sense, you still need an infinite number because otherwise there are all these like non-overlapping sets or something. That's as close as I come to answering that question. But no, I do want to make a sine wave version of this. It's just this circuit is so clean that I'm still kind of like working within that like, because you could compromise. There's always this compromise. If you want to make a sine wave, it's a different kind of circuit that.
I think about it rather positively, because I didn't mean that in any point as criticism at all. I just find, because these are the moments when you, especially when you work with theory and technology, where that's probably the transition from theory to real life. There's the moment where it has to collapse. Yeah. Because we have mathematics as a science that is able to completely disconnect and to describe things that are completely impossible in the real world. And on the other hand, we have quantum physics, the other end of the spectrum, which confronts us with laws we cannot escape, basically. Yeah.
It's funny, I was speaking last week with some mathematicians who are exploring the current kind of fundamental questions of logic and proof theory and these things. And they're exploring what is possible, what the limits of knowledge, the limits of proof, the limits of truth, these like fundamental ideas, these philosophical ideas in mathematics. And to me, that's like very, very similar to the pursuit of quantum mechanics, which is understanding the fundamental building blocks of the universe. It's like, to me, they're just they're the same studies, but in different kind of models. But none of the mathematicians were interested in quantum mechanics. It was so wild, because like quantum mechanics is practical, as philosophical as it is also. It's like this whole real version of math that they stay away from.
We should continue the conversation later on.
Yes, okay. Yeah, right. Yeah. No, but I do.
It's obvious that mathematicians are not interested in quantum physics, I'd say.
Well, no, I don't know. Yeah. I guess I'm not a mathematician.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I think it's better that you continue the conversation.
Yes,
the freaks of math and physics.
It's too deep here.
Never.
So
okay.
Let's play
Great.
the thing.
So I'm going to plug it in. It's not that dramatic, but there is something that happens when the piece is first turned on, which is that every frequency starts at the same time, which means that they're all perfectly in sync at the very beginning. And then as they play, they gradually go out of sync. And when you normally hear the piece, everything is out of sync, or at least, it's not very close anymore. It's like if you start it's like that Ligeti metronome piece. If all the metronomes are started at the same exact time, they're together, and then they get to be totally random later. So at the beginning, you're going to hear this kind of like kind of thing. It's very subtle, but it's what happens at the very beginning when everything is lined up. So thanks guys very much. I hope you enjoy the exhibition, the show. Wait, you just... Anyway, cool. It's like a performance or something. Okay.